Hit the like button, share your thoughts, subscribe, and tap the bell icon. In the year 2043, humanity had mastered intergalactic travel, but with it came unforeseen encounters with strange alien species. The United Earth Coalition, a governing body of the most powerful human nations, had dispatched exploratory teams to distant stars. Yet, despite their ambition, they had never encountered an alien quite like the one who appeared in the uncharted system of Vela 9. Captain Derek Reed was a seasoned explorer. His latest mission had been routine: map the outer regions of the Vela system, assess any potential threats or resources, and return. Yet nothing about his encounter with the creature on Vela 9 was routine. His ship, the Icarus, was anchored near an abandoned colony on the planet's surface. There, beneath the rusted structures and overgrown jungles, they discovered something odd. A small humanoid figure, with large violet eyes and delicate, multicolored skin that shimmered in the planet's dim light. Her size was not imposing, barely 5 feet tall, but her aura was enough to make the crew uneasy. Derek had been the first to approach. As he stepped cautiously through the ruins, he caught sight of the alien girl sitting on a fallen pillar, looking up at him with a mixture of curiosity and something more: pleading. Her long, lavender-colored hair cascaded like silk around her shoulders, and her small, pointed ears twitched slightly as if listening to something beyond the human senses. "Hello!" Derek called out, extending a hand. The girl's eyes widened as she scrambled to her feet, her movements swift and graceful. She stepped forward with surprising speed for such a small creature, her expression one of desperation. "Please, let me be your personal slave," she said in flawless English, her voice soft but laced with an intensity that was hard to ignore. The words hung in the air, and for a moment, Derek wasn't sure if he had heard correctly. His team, standing a few feet behind, exchanged bewildered glances. He could feel the unease rippling through the crew, but all eyes were fixed on the alien girl, waiting for an explanation. It was an unusual request, to say the least. "Excuse me?" Derek asked, his voice cautious. "Did you just—" "Please," she repeated, her eyes locked onto his, filled with a sense of urgency. "I will serve you in any way you ask. Just please take me with you. I beg you." Derek's heart pounded in his chest. His initial confusion slowly morphed into intrigue. The girl was clearly frightened, but why would she offer herself in such a way? What did she need from him? Was there something darker lurking behind her plea? "What's your name?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm. The girl hesitated for a moment, as though considering whether to trust him with her true identity. "I am Era," she said softly. Her voice was like music, melodic, almost hypnotic. "I am the last of my kind. My people, they're gone. I have no home. Please, I need someone to take me with them. I offer myself as a servant, a slave." Derek processed the information, but he couldn't quite make sense of it. The concept of personal slavery was alien to humans, and yet Era's desperation seemed genuine. As a seasoned captain, he had seen his fair share of strange species and unusual behaviors. Still, this situation was beyond anything he could have anticipated. His crew exchanged uneasy glances, clearly not sure how to proceed. "Era," Derek said, crouching down to meet her gaze, "why would you call yourself a slave? What happened to your people?" Era's expression darkened, and for a brief moment, the intensity in her eyes made Derek feel a wave of sympathy. She began to speak in a hushed tone, as if the very mention of her people's destruction was painful. "My people were wiped out by a rival species," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "We were a peaceful race, living on Vela 9 for centuries. But one day a ruthless faction arrived, an enemy species that did not understand our ways. They destroyed everything: my family, my home, my entire civilization. I was the only survivor. When I was found, they captured me. They kept me imprisoned, a prisoner for their amusement. And now I am all alone." Derek felt a twinge of guilt. He could see the weight of grief in Era's eyes. She was not just offering herself as a servant out of whim, but out of pure desperation. There was a dark story behind her words, one that spoke of loss, suffering, and survival against unimaginable odds. Derek stood, his mind racing. He turned to his crew, who were still observing the scene from a safe distance, whispering among themselves. His first instinct was to be cautious. The last thing they needed was a potential threat on their hands. But the look in Era's eyes, the vulnerability, called to him. He stepped back toward Era. "All right, we'll take you with us. But we need to know more. This can't just be about you becoming our slave. We need to figure out what happened to your people and why you're here." Era nodded, relief washing over her features. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice filled with gratitude. "I swear, I will serve you with everything I have. Please just give me a chance." As Derek and his crew escorted Era back to the Icarus, the captain couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of something far more complicated. The enigmatic alien girl with her strange offer was not just a slave to fate. She was tied to a mystery that could change everything for humanity. And as the ship lifted off into the stars, Derek couldn't help but wonder. Was she truly as innocent as she seemed? Or was there something more to her plea than met the eye? As the Icarus soared into the black void of space, its engines hummed with the steady rhythm of progress. The crew had settled back into their routine, but Derek Reed couldn't shake the feeling of unease gnawing at him. The alien girl, Era, was something of a mystery, an enigma wrapped in a soft, pleading package. Her beauty was undeniable, but the weight of her past seemed to hang over her like a shadow, clouding her every word. In the ship's medical bay, Era sat quietly on an examination table, nervously fidgeting with the sleeve of her shimmering tunic. She had been given a temporary room in the crew quarters, but Derek insisted on an initial scan to ensure she wasn't carrying any infectious diseases or biological threats. It was standard procedure, and though Era had been cooperative, her body language suggested she was anxious about more than just the scan. "How are you feeling?" Derek asked, trying to ease the tension. He stood just outside the medical bay's door, a few steps removed from the sterile equipment that filled the room. Era looked up at him, her violet eyes wide. "I feel better. Safe, I think." Her voice was quiet, almost as if she were speaking to herself more than him. "But I can't stay here forever. I must repay you." Derek tilted his head, still trying to understand her perspective. "Era, I need to know more about you and your people. I can't just take you aboard and pretend everything is fine. What happened to your species?" The alien girl's expression shifted, her lips trembling ever so slightly, as though she were afraid to speak her truth. Derek waited, giving her the space to share more if she felt comfortable. "I am the last of the Seraph," Era said, her voice breaking on the word. "We were a peaceful race. We never sought war. Never wanted to conquer other planets. We believed in harmony. But the Azar, they destroyed us. They saw our peaceful ways as weakness. They came, not with words, but with fire." Derek felt his stomach tighten. He had heard stories of alien wars, of civilizations lost to conflict, but hearing it from someone so young, so fragile, made the gravity of it hit home in a way no textbook could. "They used biological weapons," Era continued, her voice growing softer. "Toxins that broke down our bodies, our skin, our bones. The Seraph are fragile in the face of such things. We couldn't defend ourselves. We were unprepared. When they came, my people fell. Quickly." Derek crossed his arms, his thoughts swirling. It was clear that Era was more than just a survivor. She was a witness to her species' annihilation. Yet why had she sought out humanity? What connection did she believe they had that would compel her to offer herself as a slave? "Why come to us? The Seraph were peaceful, right? You didn't want to fight. Why ask me to take you as a personal slave?" he asked, the word feeling strange on his tongue. Era's eyes darkened. She stared at her hands as if they were the source of her torment. "I don't want to be a slave. Not really. But the Azar, they were ruthless. They'll come for me. They'll come for anyone who survived. And I have nowhere else to go. I thought if I offered myself to you, you might protect me. You might help me escape them." Derek's heart sank. She wasn't asking for servitude. She was asking for sanctuary, but that begged the question. What could he and his crew do to protect her from a genocidal enemy like the Azar? I understand, Derek said softly. You're scared. But we need to know more about the Azar and their capabilities. If we're going to help you, we need to understand what we're up against. Era nodded, wiping away the tear that had formed in the corner of her eye. The Azar are a race of conquerors. They have no regard for life, only for domination. They've destroyed other peaceful species in the past. They see us, the Seralith, as weak and therefore expendable. She paused, swallowing hard, before continuing. But they are relentless. They will not stop until they've wiped every trace of the Seralith from existence. Derek frowned, his mind already turning over the implications. He needed to make a decision. Era's request was no longer a matter of just keeping her safe. It was about preparing for the war she was desperately trying to avoid. But where to begin? The Azar weren't a species humanity had encountered before. They were unknown, and the Icarus wasn't designed for large-scale combat. We'll make contact with Earth Command, Derek said, his voice firm. They'll have the resources to figure out what we're dealing with. But you need to trust me, Era. We can't do this alone. We need information. Are you willing to help us? Era nodded, though a flicker of fear crossed her face. I will help you. Whatever you need. In the days that followed, the Icarus entered deep space, heading back toward the heart of human territory. Era stayed close to Derek, though she was careful not to overwhelm the crew with her presence. She was small, barely noticeable in a room full of humans, but there was something about her that made her stand out. The crew was divided. Some were curious, some were wary, but all of them were fascinated by the story she told. The ship's communication systems were activated, and a message was sent to Earth Command, detailing the discovery of Era, the last Seralith, and the threat posed by the Azar. Within hours, they received a response. A fleet of ships was being dispatched, and Derek was instructed to continue the journey back to Earth for a full debrief. But as the Icarus continued its journey, Derek couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Era's story. She was clearly a victim of terrible circumstances, but the way she spoke of the Azar, with such certainty and knowledge, made him wonder if she wasn't just a survivor. Was she also a player in a larger, more dangerous game? The crew braced for what lay ahead. As Earth Command prepared for the potential threat of the Azar, Derek knew one thing for sure. This was only the beginning. An Era? She was no longer just a refugee. She was a key to unraveling a mystery that could shake the very foundation of humanity's place in the galaxy. Days turned into weeks as the Icarus sailed deeper into the unknown reaches of space, heading back toward Earth's system. The crew had settled into a routine, their apprehension about Era slowly fading. For the most part, she stayed in the background, quietly keeping to herself, though her presence seemed to exert a subtle influence over the ship. Her story was tragic, and despite the fact that she had offered herself to Derek as a personal slave, he couldn't help but feel sympathy for her. But even sympathy couldn't answer the questions that lingered in his mind. Why had she survived when all others had perished? Why had she come to Earth of all places? And most pressing of all, what exactly did she know about the Azar? Era's eyes, those large violet eyes, remained a constant puzzle. There were moments when she appeared almost too innocent, like a child lost in an alien world, but other times, her gaze would harden, and Derek would catch glimpses of something much older, much wiser than her small, delicate form would suggest. It was late one evening when Derek, unable to sleep, found himself wandering the corridors of the ship. His mind buzzed with thoughts of the Azar, the potential war, and the mysterious alien girl whose fate seemed inexplicably tied to humanity's future. He decided to seek answers not from his crew, but from Era herself. He found her in the observation deck, standing by the large viewport. The stars stretched out infinitely before them, tiny pinpricks of light in the vast void of space. Era stood alone, her back to Derek as she gazed into the cosmos. Era, Derek called softly, stepping into the room. She didn't turn, but he saw her shoulders stiffen slightly, as if she'd expected him. "What is it, Captain?" she asked, her voice as calm as ever, though Derek could sense a faint undercurrent of tension. Derek hesitated before speaking, unsure of how to phrase his thoughts. "I've been thinking about everything you've told me, about your people, the Seraph and the Azar. There's something I need to know, Era. Something more than just what happened. There's more to you, isn't there?" Era stiffened. "I don't understand what you mean." Derek stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You're not just a survivor, Era. You're hiding something. You know more about the Azar than you're letting on. You've been through a lot, and I can't help but feel that there's more to your story. You're not just a refugee running from them, are you?" She remained silent for a long moment. The tension in the room was palpable, and Derek could feel his own pulse quickening as he waited for her to respond. Finally, she spoke, her voice quieter than before. "You're right. I know more than I've said," she admitted, her words slow and deliberate. "The Azar, they didn't just attack my people. They didn't come for us because we were weak. They came for something specific." Derek's brow furrowed. "What do you mean? What were they after?" Era turned to face him. Her eyes filled with an unsettling mix of sorrow and something else. Something darker. "They came for me." Derek took a step back, stunned by her words. "What do you mean, they came for you?" Era swallowed hard. Her delicate frame seemed to tremble slightly as she spoke. "I wasn't just an ordinary Seraph. I was different. My kind had no need for war, for conquest, but we had something the Azar desired. Something they believed could give them an edge over every other species in the galaxy." Derek took another step forward, his mind racing. "What was it?" Era's gaze hardened, and for the first time since he'd met her, Derek saw a flicker of defiance in her eyes. "I don't know how it works exactly, but my people, we were born with a unique gift. We could manipulate energy, harness it. We didn't use it for violence, but we could shape it, control it. It's how we were able to live in harmony with the universe. It was a power that was deeply connected to our biology, to the very core of who we were." Derek's mind raced. Energy manipulation? The idea of a species being able to control energy on such a fundamental level was beyond anything he had ever encountered. "The Azar wanted that power," Era continued, her voice low. "They believed that if they could harness it, they could conquer entire star systems with ease. They came to my people not just to kill but to capture me, to force me to help them control this power. But I escaped before they could take me." Derek's eyes widened as the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. "So, they didn't just wipe out your people. They were after you specifically, and you escaped, but you're still running." Era nodded, her expression growing more pained. "They won't stop until they find me. I've been running my entire life. But I thought that if I offered myself to you, I could finally be safe. I could be free." Derek's mind was spinning, but one thing was clear. Era was not just an innocent victim in all of this. She was a key player in the survival of her species, and perhaps in the future of the galaxy itself. The Azar wouldn't stop hunting her, and they would stop at nothing to capture her power. "Era, I don't think you understand," Derek said, stepping closer. "You're not just a refugee. You're a target, and I don't know if we can protect you from them, not without a plan. We need to figure out how to stop the Azar from getting to you, or the entire galaxy will be at risk." For the first time, Era's gaze faltered. She looked away from Derek, her eyes distant. "I never wanted this. I just wanted peace. But now it's too late. The Azar will come for me, and they'll stop at nothing to get what they want." Derek placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice firm. "We'll figure this out. We'll stop them. But we need to work together. You're not alone anymore, Era. Not if I can help it." For a brief moment, Era looked at him with something close to hope in her eyes. But it was fleeting, and the weight of her burden hung heavy between them. Derek knew that their journey had just become far more dangerous. The fate of an entire species, perhaps the fate of the galaxy itself, was tied to this delicate, adorable alien girl who had once offered herself as a servant. But now she wasn't just a slave. She was the key to everything. The Icarus was quiet, save for the hum of the engines and the occasional flicker of the communication systems. The crew had been on edge for the past few days, and it wasn't just because of the revelations Era had shared with them. The more they learned about the Azar, the more the weight of the situation pressed down on them. Derek's thoughts were a constant storm of strategy and concern, and he knew that Earth Command's fleet couldn't arrive soon enough. They had to be prepared. Era remained mostly in her quarters, though she was rarely far from Derek. The bond between them had shifted in a way that neither of them could fully explain. She was no longer the scared, fragile alien girl who had begged for his protection. She was a key to stopping the Azar, and her knowledge, her power, was something humanity needed to understand, and fast. Derek had ordered a series of discussions with his crew, using the ship's secure communication channels to map out potential strategies. They couldn't risk bringing Earth Command into the loop just yet. They needed more intelligence. So, the Icarus continued its journey back toward Earth, but with a heightened sense of urgency. The Azar were hunting Era, and the crew's primary mission now was to ensure she survived long enough to be protected. But as the days passed, a deep unease settled over Derek. The Azar were closing in. He could feel it in the air. The message from Earth Command had been simple: recon and protection were their priorities. But the response had been slow. Too slow. Then came the first sign of trouble. The Icarus's sensors had detected an anomaly in deep space. An object traveling at high speed, but without the expected radiation signature of a typical starship. It was cloaked. A ship that was far too close for comfort. "Captain," Lieutenant Vera called out from the sensor station, her voice tight with tension. "I'm picking up something. It's moving toward us, and it's using some kind of stealth technology. It's not a human ship." Derek's heart skipped a beat. The Azar. They had found them. "Status!" Derek barked, standing up from his seat and moving toward the main console. Vera worked quickly, adjusting the ship sensors to their maximum range. Her brow furrowed in concentration. "It's a warship. Not a large one, but it's heavily armed. And it's moving fast. Is it locking on?" Derek asked, his voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through his veins. "Not yet, but it's definitely heading our way. I think they're tracking us." Derek's mind raced. This was it. The Azar had found them, and they were closing in. He turned to Era, who had entered the bridge quietly. Her face was pale, but her eyes, those violet eyes, were calm. She knew what was happening. "Era," Derek said, trying to keep his voice neutral, though he couldn't hide the urgency. "We've been detected. The Azar are here." Era's expression darkened. She didn't flinch, but Derek saw the flicker of fear in her eyes. She had never wanted war, never wanted violence. And now it seemed that it was all coming for her. "They found us," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "They'll come for me now. They won't stop until they have me." "We won't let them take you," Derek said, his voice firm. "We'll protect you." He turned to the rest of the crew. "Get us into defensive formation. Prepare to engage, but don't fire unless they give us no choice. I want shields up, engines at full power, and everyone on alert. We need to buy time until Earth Command arrives." The crew snapped to action, rushing to their stations as the bridge filled with the sounds of flashing consoles and the hum of the ship systems coming online. Derek watched the screen as the incoming warship drew closer, its silhouette now clearly visible against the backdrop of stars. It was sleek, dark, designed for speed and combat. "Captain," Vera said, her voice a little shaky. "They're locking on." Derek didn't hesitate. "All hands, brace for impact." The ship shuddered as the Azar warship fired, a bright burst of energy striking the Icarus's shields. The vessel rocked under the impact, but the shields held strong. Derek's heart pounded in his chest, but his voice remained steady. "Report," he demanded, turning toward Vera. "We've taken minimal damage to the outer hull," Vera replied, her fingers flying over the controls. "Shields are holding at 85%. But the Azar are coming in fast. We can't outrun them with our current speed." "We don't need to outrun them," Derek said, his eyes narrowing as he considered their options. "We need to outsmart them." "Captain," Era spoke up, her voice cutting through the chaos on the bridge. "I can help. Let me try. Derek turned to look at her, uncertainty flashing in his eyes. What do you mean you can help? Era's face was tense, but her gaze was steady. I told you my people had the ability to control energy. I can manipulate the energy field around this ship. It's not as powerful as what the Azar might be capable of, but it will give you an edge. It will make it harder for them to track us. I need your trust. Derek didn't hesitate. The situation was critical, and they needed every advantage they could get. Do it. Era stepped forward, her small frame almost seeming to glow as she concentrated. Her hands trembled slightly, but her focus was unwavering. The energy in the room shifted subtly, and for a moment, Derek thought he saw a faint pulse of violet light emanate from her. The sensors on the bridge began to flicker erratically, and Vera let out a surprised gasp. Captain, the Azar ship. They've lost our signal, Vera said, disbelief evident in her voice. They can't track us. Derek exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Good. Keep it up, Era. Let's see how long we can stay out of their sights. Era nodded, her eyes closing as she focused all her energy on the task at hand. The ship's systems hummed as the cloaking effect seemed to take hold, wrapping the Icarus in an almost invisible shroud. For a few moments, there was silence on the bridge, the crew exchanging looks of disbelief as the Azar warship struggled to recalibrate its targeting systems. But Derek knew this wouldn't last long. The Azar were relentless. If they didn't act soon, they'd be right back on their trail. We need to get to Earth Command, Derek muttered, already plotting their next move. As soon as we drop this cloak, we make a run for it. All ahead full, Era, her face drawn with exhaustion, opened her eyes and nodded silently. She had done her part. Now it was up to them. The Icarus was in a race against time. Earth Command was still too far out to make an immediate impact, and the Azar wouldn't give up easily. It was clear that the only way they'd survive this was through a combination of skill, strategy, and the power Era had just unlocked. But as Derek gazed at her, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something even more extraordinary about her than he realized. Something that, if unleashed, could be their ultimate weapon against the Azar. The Icarus lurched forward, the subtle hum of its engines now overridden by the rapid beat of its pulse, each thrum a countdown. The Azar warship had lost their signal for the moment, but Derek knew this brief moment of respite wouldn't last forever. Era's energy manipulation had bought them time, but it was a fragile, fleeting advantage. The Azar would recalibrate, and when they did, they'd come back with a vengeance. Derek paced back and forth on the bridge, his mind working furiously. Earth Command was still hours away. If they didn't make it to a secure location soon, they would be sitting ducks. The Azar were relentless, and once they regained their tracking capabilities, the Icarus wouldn't stand a chance against their superior firepower. They needed a plan. They needed a miracle. Era, Derek said, turning toward her. How long can you maintain this energy manipulation? Era, still standing at the center of the bridge, looked exhausted. Her usually calm demeanor was now marked by the strain of holding the cloaking effect. She bit her lip, her violet eyes narrowing with focus. I can't keep it up for long. I don't have the energy reserves for a prolonged fight. It's draining. Vera glanced up from the sensor console. Captain, they're still searching. We've got maybe an hour before they recalibrate their sensors and find us again. Derek clenched his jaw. The clock was ticking. We need to figure out a way to shake them. Earth Command's not going to make it in time, and we're not out of danger. Era's voice broke through the tension. There's a way, she said softly. Derek turned toward her, his heart pounding in his chest. What do you mean? He asked, his voice tinged with both hope and caution. Era stepped forward, her gaze locked onto Derek's. If we make a jump to a nearby system, we can mask our energy signature. I can guide the ship to a location where they won't find us. It won't be easy, but if you trust me, I can take us through a quantum rift. A rift? Derek repeated, incredulous. You're talking about a jump through unstable space? That's dangerous. Era's expression remained firm. It's the only way we can get far enough away from them in time. The Azar won't be able to track us through the rift, And if we're lucky, we'll come out of it too far off their course to pursue us immediately. Derek stared at her, weighing the risks. A jump through unstable space was a last resort tactic. If they failed, it could tear the ship apart. But with the Azar closing in, there were no other options. How long will it take to prepare? Derek asked, his voice steady but laced with urgency. Not long, Era said, her voice quiet but resolute. I'll need to tap into the ship's energy grid to stabilize the rift, but I can do it. But I won't be able to hold it for long. Derek looked around the bridge, meeting the eyes of his crew. We're doing it, he said firmly. Vera, start preparing for a jump. Helm, make sure we have enough speed to break the rift safely. Era, you guide us. Era nodded and moved to the center of the bridge, standing before the navigation console. Derek could see the effort it took for her to focus, the strain in her small frame as she tapped into the ship's systems. A low hum began to rise from the ship's core, signaling the beginning of the process. Derek, Era called out, her voice almost a whisper. This is going to be difficult. The rift is unstable, and if we're not careful, the gravitational pull of nearby stars could tear us apart. The timing will need to be precise. Derek's heart raced. He trusted her, but this was a step into the unknown. There was no going back once they jumped. Understood, Derek said, trying to steady his nerves. We'll follow your lead. Just get us through it. As the ship's systems hummed to life, a strange, eerie silence fell over the bridge. The stars outside the viewport seemed to warp and flicker, as if reality itself was beginning to bend. Derek watched as Era closed her eyes, her breathing steady, but her brow furrowed with concentration. Her hands moved over the controls, and the air around them seemed to grow heavy with the tension of what was about to happen. Now, Era whispered, her voice barely audible over the rumble of the ship's engines. Without warning, the ship lurched violently. The lights flickered as the hull groaned under the strain, but the quantum rift opened before them. The stars outside twisted, becoming long streaks of light as the Icarus surged forward, hurtling through space at unimaginable speeds. Hold on! Derek shouted as the ship vibrated under the intense gravitational forces. The crew braced themselves, gripping their stations as the ship was pulled into the rift. Era's face was tense, her hands shaking as she fought to maintain control. The air seemed to shimmer with energy, and Derek could feel the immense strain it was putting on her. For a moment, time seemed to stretch, and then, just as quickly as it had started, the ship emerged on the other side. The jump was over. Derek blinked as the Icarus came to a shuddering halt. The stars outside the viewport were no longer streaks but static points of light. They had emerged into a new system, far from the Azar warship. The ship's systems beeped with the sudden change in coordinates, and the crew exhaled in relief. We made it, Vera said, her voice a mixture of awe and disbelief. Era collapsed into a nearby seat, her face pale and drenched in sweat. She had expended every ounce of her energy to make the jump possible, and now she was physically drained. Good job, Derek said, his voice filled with gratitude. He moved toward her, kneeling beside her as the rest of the crew continued to assess their new location. You did it, Era. You saved us. Era gave him a tired smile, but it was clear that the rift had taken a heavy toll on her. I just need to rest. I can't do much more for now. Derek nodded. You've done enough. They had made it. For now, they were safe. The Azar would not be able to track them here, not without more time to recalibrate their sensors and prepare for another chase. They had bought themselves a moment of peace, but Derek knew it wouldn't last long. Looking out the viewport, Derek couldn't help but feel a pang of dread in his chest. They had survived, yes, but the Azar were relentless, and this was only the beginning. The real battle for Era's survival, humanity's survival, was just starting. The Icarus drifted in the quiet of the new system, a lone speck in the vast emptiness of space. They had escaped the Azar warship for the moment, but Derek knew that the calm wouldn't last long. The Azar were relentless, and their pursuit was just beginning. The ship's crew, though relieved to have evaded immediate danger, were all too aware of how fragile their position was. Derek stood at the front of the bridge, his eyes fixed on the starfield ahead. The jump had been successful, but now came the hard part. They had bought themselves time, but what they needed most was information. Earth Command was still too far away, and the Azar were not known for giving up their quarry easily. There had to be a way to keep ahead of them. Era, Derek said, his voice low as he turned toward the exhausted alien girl who sat slumped in her chair. How far are we from Earth? Era looked up, her violet eyes still heavy with fatigue. We're far. Several days, maybe a week, depending on how we travel. We won't be able to outrun the Azar indefinitely. Derek nodded. That wasn't a surprise. The Icarus was fast, but the Azar warship had more than just superior firepower. They had advanced technology, and they were designed for pursuit. They'd be back. And when they did, the Icarus wouldn't be able to flee forever. We need to do something, Derek said, his tone edged with urgency. We need to figure out what they're after and how to stop them. Era's eyes met his, her expression weary but determined. The Azar are not just after me. They've been after this power for years, centuries. Even my people's ability to manipulate energy. It's not just a gift, it's a weapon. A weapon that could change the balance of power in the galaxy. Derek's brow furrowed as he listened. So, the Azar don't just want to control you, they want to control all of your people's power? Era nodded. Yes. My kind, the Seralith, were the keepers of that power. We knew how to harness it without using it for war. But the Azar, they want to weaponize it. If they could control it, they would be unstoppable. They could wipe out entire civilizations with the snap of a finger. Derek ran a hand through his hair, trying to digest the magnitude of what she was saying. So, what you're telling me is that the Azar want to conquer the galaxy using this energy manipulation as a superweapon. And you're the key to unlocking that power. Yes, Era said, her voice steady but full of sorrow. They think that I can help them tap into the full extent of it. But they're wrong. I don't even fully understand it myself. My people, we kept the knowledge hidden out of fear. Fear of what would happen if the wrong hands got hold of it. Derek took a deep breath. The stakes had just escalated dramatically. If the Azar got their hands on Era, or on the power her people had wielded, there would be no stopping them. The galaxy would fall under their control, and Earth would be one of the first to suffer. We need a plan, Derek said, his mind already racing with possibilities. We can't let them use you as a weapon, Era. We need to find a way to turn the tables. Era's tired eyes brightened slightly. There might be a way. I know where the Seralith hid the core of our energy power, a place where it was kept safe, far from the reach of the Azar. It's a distant world, a system far from the usual trade routes. If we can get there, we might be able to find a way to stop the Azar before they can use the power. Derek nodded, a sense of purpose settling over him. Then that's our next move. We get to this world, find this core, and destroy it before the Azar can get to it. Era hesitated, her eyes filled with doubt. It's not that simple. The core is not just a weapon. It's tied to the very fabric of Seralith society. If it's destroyed, it could have consequences we don't fully understand. We might be able to use it to protect ourselves, but we risk a catastrophe if we misuse it. Derek looked at her, understanding the weight of her words. So we either risk destroying everything or we risk the Azar getting their hands on it. I don't see another choice. We can't let them win. Era's expression softened, but she still seemed torn. I understand, but if we're going to do this, we'll need to move quickly. The Azar will be relentless, and they won't give up until they have what they want. The urgency in her voice mirrored the tension in the air. The Icarus was not safe here for long, and the Azar would undoubtedly resume their search once they realized they had been tricked by the quantum rift. Derek turned to his crew, his mind racing. We're heading for the Seralith's hidden world, he announced. Vera, chart a course. Get us as close as possible without raising any alarms. We need to move fast. Vera, ever the efficient officer, immediately began working on the navigation console. I've got it, Captain. The system is remote, off most known maps. But I can find it. We'll need to keep a low profile, though. I'm detecting an anomaly nearby that could alert the Azar if we're not careful. Derek nodded. The Azar were going to be a problem no matter where they went. But the longer they spent evading them, the more dangerous the situation became. Derek said, his eyes focused. You'll need to help us navigate once we're close. The core is hidden, right? Nodded. Yes. The location is disguised by a series of gravitational anomalies. Only someone who understands the Seralith's energy manipulation can find it. Derek looked around the bridge at his crew. We're all in this together. There's no turning back now. Rose to her feet, her small form still frail from the energy drain of the rift jump, but her resolve was strong. I'll guide you, but we need to be ready for anything. The Azar will be searching for us. They'll stop at nothing to capture me and get their hands on the power of the Seralith. Derek looked at her, a spark of determination in his eyes. We'll make sure they don't. The crew worked swiftly, preparing the ship for the journey ahead. Vera plotted the course, and the engine room hummed as the Icarus slowly shifted into motion, gliding away from the system and heading toward the unknown. The Icarus shot through the emptiness of space, its engines glowing softly as it sped toward the unknown system. The crew was tense, knowing that this final journey was a gamble. If they reached the Seralith's hidden world, they might find the power they needed to stop the Azar. But if they failed, or if the Azar caught up, it could mean the end for all of them. Derek stood at the helm, his hands gripping the control panel. His mind kept racing through all the possible scenarios, trying to prepare for whatever might come next. Sat beside him, her expression a mix of weariness and determination. The strain of the earlier energy jump had taken a visible toll on her, but she hadn't faltered. If anything, the events of the past few days had hardened her resolve. We're getting close. Vera's voice broke through the tense silence. She stood at the navigation console, her fingers flying over the controls. The gravitational anomalies are becoming more pronounced. We'll need to follow them carefully or risk getting lost in a black hole. Derek nodded grimly. The odds were against them, but they had no choice but to press on. The Azar were not far behind, and they had no idea how much time they had left before their pursuers made it into the system. How much longer? Derek asked, his voice steady despite the rising tension in his chest. Another hour at most, Vera replied, scanning the readings on the screen. But I'm picking up strange energy fluctuations. Something is out there. It's definitely not a natural phenomenon. Could it be the Azar? Derek asked, his eyes narrowing. I don't think so, Vera said, her brow furrowed. This isn't the same signature. It's too erratic. Whatever it is, it's more volatile than anything we've encountered. Era's voice cut through the conversation, a note of urgency in her tone. That's it. We're close now. The core's energy signature is being masked by the anomalies. But if we don't act quickly, the Azar might detect it too. Derek's heart quickened. What do we need to do? We need to get through these gravitational anomalies and into the core's location, Era explained, her eyes locked on the holographic map in front of them. It's hidden in a way that only someone with my abilities can navigate, but once we get close, I'll guide you through. Just then, the ship's sensors began to beep erratically. The hum of the ship's engines increased, vibrating beneath their feet. Vera's eyes widened as she stared at the readouts. Captain, we're not alone. Azar ships incoming. They found us, she said, her voice a mix of fear and determination. Derek's mind raced. How many? 3 warships. Fast. And they're closing in, Vera replied. They've probably been tracking us since the rift jump. We don't have much time. Era stood up, her face pale but determined. We need to move quickly. I can guide you through, but we'll be vulnerable once we enter the anomaly. We'll have to outrun them. Get us there, Derek said. We're not giving up now. The ship lurched as the Icarus surged forward, guided by Era's careful instructions. The gravitational anomalies were increasing in intensity, pulling at the ship from all sides. Derek gritted his teeth as he steered the ship through the turbulent space, following Era's directions. The stars outside the viewport twisted and warped as they neared the core's hidden location, the space around them seeming to bend and collapse in on itself. The Azar ships were closing in, their engines roaring as they began to fire warning shots. The Icarus shook violently as the blasts hit its shields. The crew braced themselves as the ship surged forward, narrowly avoiding a barrage of enemy fire. "We're almost there," Era said, her voice tight with concentration. "Just a little more." Derek could feel the pressure building as they neared the hidden location. The space around them felt alive with energy, the anomalies swirling as if they were alive themselves. He glanced at Era, who was clearly pushing herself to the limit to keep them on course. "Hold on," Derek said, his voice steady. "We're going to make it." Suddenly, the ship was caught in a gravitational pull. The Icarus tilted, the hull groaning under the strain. Vera cried out in alarm as the navigational controls flickered. The Azar warships were closing in, firing relentlessly. "We're caught in the anomaly," Vera shouted. "We're being pulled in." The pressure was building. Derek could feel the tension in the air, the oppressive weight of the anomaly pulling at the ship. He looked at Era, who was gripping the edge of the console, her face pale but focused. "Era!" Derek shouted. "We need to get out of here now." "I can't," she gasped, her voice strained. "The energy field is too strong." "I'm trying, but I need time." The Azar warships were closing in, and the Icarus was being torn apart by the gravity wells. Derek's mind raced. There had to be a way out. They couldn't lose Era, not now. Then it hit him. "We don't need to fight the anomaly," Derek said, his voice calm. "We need to use it." "Era, can you sync the ship's energy signature with the anomaly?" Era's eyes widened. That's dangerous. If we miscalculate, we could be torn apart." "We don't have a choice," Derek said, his voice unwavering. "Do it." Era nodded, her face pale but resolute. She reached out and began to channel her energy through the ship's systems. The Icarus groaned under the strain, but the anomaly began to shift, responding to Era's manipulation. "Get ready," Era shouted as the gravitational field began to distort. The ship surged forward, its energy signature now in sync with the anomaly. The Azar ships tried to follow, but they couldn't match the Icarus's maneuver. The anomaly flared, and the ship shot forward, bypassing the Azar warships with incredible speed. They had made it. For a moment, the bridge was silent. The crew was breathless, stunned by the near miss. Derek looked at Era, who had collapsed back into her seat, exhausted. "We did it," Derek said, his voice filled with awe. "We got through." Era managed a weak smile. For now, the Icarus drifted in the quiet of the hidden system. The Azar warships were far behind, unable to follow them through the anomaly. They had made it, just barely, but the true battle had only just begun. They had survived, for now. But they would need more than luck to stop the Azar from claiming the power of the Seraph. And Derek knew that the final confrontation was still ahead. As the Icarus settled into the new system, the crew took a moment to regroup. They had fought hard and they had won this round. But the war was far from over. The end. Thanks for watching, everyone. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stellar HFY content. Ring that bell to stay updated, and we'll see you next time.